Tutorial, I'm going to talk about how to extract and kind of pull off the doors and the windows on a car. And so far we've been using what I call planar modeling, where we start with essentially, a two-dimensional plane and kind of remember we start with two cylinders around the wheel and kind of brought it back around to the center and then mirrored it across to the other side of the car. And let me just go to show, isolate. So isolating just the body of the car. And so at first it's going to look kind of like a sheet of paper, right? And so the strategy that I like to do to kind of fix that is, it'll look something like this. And so the strategy that I like to employ here is to just kind of extrude the edges that are looking flat. And this is going to carry into how we're going to deal with the car doors and the windows as well. So I'm just going to right click on this wheelbase and go to edge mode and oops, zoom in. And I think if I double click this edge loop, it's going to select all around my car. Remember, the F button is our friend here in terms of framing this up. So I'm just going to have to manually select this edge loop. I'll press 4 just to make sure I'm not selecting any wrong faces, 5 to get back. And so as a general strategy to make this look realistic like a car where it's bent metal to go around the car is I'm just going to go to the modeling toolkit and then extrude, and I can either pull that in with this blue arrow. If I press this button, that'll switch it to kind of the world mode, right? So this is relative to the object. If I click that power button, it kind of moves it to relative to the world, so it just moves straight inwards when I click on that. And yeah, so that's kind of my general strategy. So if you see things that are kind of looking, making your car look like it's a two-dimensional, piece of paper, that's kind of my main approach to kind of start filling in the car. There are certain cars where maybe you want to just select the whole thing and extrude and kind of turn it into a fully three-dimensional object, and it just depends on the car. Okay, so the next thing you'll notice, so I'm just going to go to show, isolate, and unsolo everything else. So some other strategies that I've employed here is I've just kind of mocked in a chassis underneath the car, and so that's to make it so when light shows through, it doesn't show through the outside of the car. And so let me just isolate that real quick. So isolate that. You can see I just really roughed it in here. And again, the way that I did that is I just extruded a block and kind of pulled it through the inside of the car. And just to kind of give you a sense of the best way to do that is I selected the car, I went to the channel box layer editor, and let's see here, and let me just delete this. And I created a new layer from selected, a visibility layer. And so I could turn on and off the visibility of the car body. But something else you can do is I can click it once, so it says VPT. And so now you can see, it's a little hard to see, but there's just like a wireframe where I can kind of see the car while I'm modeling this chassis. So I was just doing really basic box modeling of this chassis, where I was just kind of moving faces around, using my orthographic view, and then just kind of lining it up with my car. I could see my car, over top of it, but it was just a wireframe that I can't even click on by mistake. And so that's an example of where having these visibility layers, again, that's under the channel box layer editor right there, can be just exceptionally helpful, in some of these processes. So let me change my shading back off of X-ray and back to normal. And wireframe unshaded. Okay, so that's how we've kind of gotten to this point. And so as a preview of what we're about to do is I've modeled the car all as one piece, and initially this windshield was part of that one piece of geometry. And so I selected those faces and extruded them up, and then I eventually extracted this window in order to kind of turn it into a separate object. And so that's what we're going to do for the car doors. So to set up the car doors, the first thing that you want to do is you want to first make sure that you have an edge loop that lines up with where you want the car door to kind of be cut out from. So That's kind of the first step. And so what I'm going to show here is I'm going to show it for each door. And so ask yourself this question. So on your car, do you expect to kind of keep it in one mode where it's not smoothed? That's what I'm going to show for this door. And then if you're in kind of smooth mode, where you press 3, that's what I'll show on this door. Okay? And I'll bookmark it so that you can jump to whichever one you want. So on this one, this is just going to be unsmoothed. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to, I'm going to go into face mode. So right click, go to face mode, and I'm going to select the faces that are going to become the door. And so this door, this is kind of like a retro car. And so the door is pretty shallow. So it's actually kind of more like that. And so all we're going to do is, so we can see the car body and the outliner. And I'm going to press this button. It's called Extract. And it should be under the Poly Modeling Shelf tab right here. So I extract, and it should just look like that. It should look like almost nothing happened. But if I look in the outliner, the body got turned into a group and then 2 different objects. So I'm just going to name this door. And then what used to be called body turned into poly surface, what is that, 4. So I'm just going to call this body 2. All right. And so now, so for this unsmooth version, one thing that can be really helpful is just to have your Arnold render view handy so that you can kind of get a preview of what's happening in your scene. And so you can see not much has happened. There's like maybe a faint hint of a cut that happened, but it's, almost imperceptible, right? And so we need to get a little bit of a panel gap. In a car in real life, there's always going to just be a little bit of a panel gap happening there. So let me just close out my Arnold render, and we'll be kind of jumping back and forth between the Arnold render. So if I press W, you can see my anchor point is kind of away from the door. And what I want to do is I want to bring the anchor point up to the door, scale the door down just a little bit, and use that to create my panel gap. And if I don't move that anchor point, if I scale it, it's going to bring the door right away from the body. So I need to kind of get that anchor point close to the door. So in order to do that, I'm going to press W, or the move tool, and then I'll tap D as in dog. And so here I can move my anchor point. And it's really helpful to use your orthographic view in order to kind of line things up correctly. The perspective view is just a little clumsy, and it's much easier just to switch between 2 orthographic views, then press D. And you can see my anchor point is now in place. It doesn't need to be perfect, but just aim for the center of the car, of the door. And so from here, I will press R on my keyboard, and I'm just going to scale this down just the tiniest little bit right there. And so let me render again and kind of see where we are. So we have a panel gap right now of about that size. And if I want a bigger panel gap, I'll just scale it in just a little bit more. And again, I'm scaling it from the center, so it just uniformly scales in. I could also scale it in like on horizontally. And for vertically, something else I could do rather than just scaling it like this is I could right click, go to edge mode, and conversely I could select those edges, press W, and then just nudge them up just a tiny bit, right? And so you're just trying to get the panel gap, to taste right there. And from here, so we got our panel gap, but you can see the light coming through it a little bit. And so what I like to do is I like to extrude these edges in order to have this look just a little bit more naturalistic. And so I'll need to do that on the car door as well as the car body. And so let me just close my Arnold render view. And something that can be helpful is just to isolate each of these as you do it. So I'm just going to go to show. I'm going to select the door and then go to show, isolate, and then view selected. So now I'm just only looking at the door. I can press F to zoom in on it. Right click and go to edge mode. And from here I can just double click an edge and get an edge loop. And I think that'll work okay. So from here I'll go to the modeling toolkit and then extrude. And usually the blue arrow, so the blue arrow is going to kind of do the trick for us right there. You can see I'm just pulling it in a little bit. And this is something, that I could fine tune a little bit more, if I wanted to. But again, I just selected the entire edge loop going around the outside. and then extruded, and then the blue arrow in. And so that kind of brought that gap right there. So to unisolate that or unsolo it, I just go to Show, Isolate Select, and then View Selected, and that'll kind of bring it back. And let's just check our render real quick to see where we are. And so not a ton change, but it's just keeping a little bit of that light from, there we go, a little bit of that light coming through. So you can see that's already helping a lot. And that's basically kind of doing the trick. But just to kind of finish it off, I'm just going to do it on the car body as well. So same thing, I'll go to the car body, Show, Isolate Selection, View Selection, and then right click Edge, and I'm just going to select these edges and extrude them the exact same way, and press F. Oops. Something again I like to do is press 4 just to make sure I made my selection correctly, and then 5 to go back to shaded. And so I'll extrude, blue arrow again, just bringing it inward. And you know, something I should do is, you see up here, there's just this vertice. At that point I can press F to focus in on it. That just needs a little bit of love, you know, so I'm just gonna bring that backwards. And again, just kind of keep your camera active, right? So a mistake I see a lot of students make is they'll just kind of start moving something and they'll never move the camera, and then they'll rotate once and then they move their vertice out here, right? So just use that Alt button, keep that camera active as you're kind of modeling your work. Okay, and so I could spend some time getting that a little bit better, but you get the idea right there. And so Show, Isolate, View Selected, and so that brings the car door back. And so that's how you can extrude out a car door for a non-smooth model. And let's see here. All right, so moving up to, so that's for unsmooth. And so smooth is basically the same process. And it looks like I needed an edge loop right there. Let me add that real quick. So for smoothed, I'll press 3. It's basically the same process. It's just, it takes, there's one slight difference that happens. So I'm gonna right click, go to face mode. We're gonna start off the exact same way in face mode. Okay, so I'm selecting the door and then I'm extracting it. So that's this button right here. Extract, you can see that it creates another group within the group. So what is this, body 3? And then door 2. And something I recommend doing is, this turns into a bit of a mess in the outliner, so you can organize this. So it's just, you click down on your middle mouse button, the mouse wheel, and you click it down and you can just physically move these out of the group. And you should only have 3 objects in here, right? So it's the third version of the body. Then we have door 2, door 1, and this group is not needed. So I'll just try to delete all this stuff. Okay, so it's good to try to keep this organized. Okay, so we are in 3 mode, and all right, so we're trying to create a panel gap. So this starts out pretty much the same way. I like to get that anchor point up into the same spot, right? So, you know, because if I scale this in, it's going away from the body right now. So remember, you press W, then you tap D as in dog. I like to switch over to the orthographic views so that I can line it up in one view, line it up in a second point of view, and then once you have that, it should be perfectly lined up. I can press D or W to kind of get out of that change anchor point mode. And so right here, let's just go ahead and just press Arnold Render, and so we can kind of see where we're at right now. And keep in mind, this backside is going to look a little bit wonky back here, so you can see, I mean, that's not terrible, right? But so this is on this other side. I extracted the door as if it was not smoothed, right? And it's just like a little bit clunky here, right? And so we're just going to try to get this like a slightly cleaner version of this for a smooth version of your model. So instead of scaling in this door right away, or I'm sorry, I'm going to scale in that door just a tiny bit, just to kind of get that panel gap going, just microscopically. And then right click, I'm going to go to edge mode, same as before, press F. Whoa, we zoomed way out. There we go. So I can isolate selected, show isolate selected, view selected on the car door. And I had multiple things selected. Let me just try that one more time. Okay. And then right click edge mode, select that whole edge loop. And so this time when I extrude, so I'm in smooth mode. So notice that when I extrude and I pull away, this really, when it's smoothed out, you see how much that rounds out right there? And so one thing that makes a difference is how far you extruded it away. So one thing to remember is when things are in 3 mode or smooth mode, the less geometry there is, the more curved it is, right? So conversely, the more geometry there is in a spot, the less curved it'll be. So I just extruded it, and then I pulled that down just a tiny bit, and then under divisions, I'm going to add divisions into that extrusion. Let's try, I don't want to add too much geometry into my model, right? But I do want that to be a pretty hard edge. And you can see it makes a difference in the panel. So let me just see what it looks like with 4. I'm going to keep this up, and then I'm going to go isolate select, and then we're going to go to Arnold and render and just kind of see where we are. So this is a big part of getting this to work. And so the main difference, and yeah, see, that's already looking pretty good. So the main difference here is when you have a smooth model, try to, I selected my edges while I was in 1 mode, but then as soon as I was about to extrude, I pressed 3 to make sure I could kind of see this, previewing it in smooth mode. And I extruded it back. I did scale this door in, but it was like microscopic, and I think I could have gotten away with doing this without scaling that door down at all. And the main thing that I was doing was when I extruded that edge loop, there was 2 things I was doing. I was keeping the divisions up here. Remember, if there's no divisions, let me just turn the divisions off. You see how much that rounds out around the door? So that causes a problem. So having divisions within your extrusion makes that edge harder and more flush with the rest of your model. So that was one big difference. And then the other difference I was doing is when I extruded it, I was trying not to pull that door in too much. So my door is pretty thin compared to the other one, and with a lot of edge loops. And then I guess the third and final thing, I know I said 2, but the third and final thing is I selected my edges in 1 mode, and then when I extruded, you might have noticed that I switched to 3 mode so that when I was looking at this, I could kind of see in real time what I was doing. And so I think a big thing to be considering when doing this process is if you don't have any lights in your scene, so let's just say I don't have any lights at all in my scene, and you're still modeling, that's fine. But before doing this process, at the very least, just go to Arnold, Lights, and Sky Dome Light, and that'll just create an even lighting around your entire scene. And so it'll make it so that you can turn on the Arnold render view and kind of see your work in real time, because sometimes something will look fine in your modeling view, but it'll kind of look not so awesome once you kind of see the render going. Okay, so that's how you extrude a door. And so similar philosophy for glass. You can see this is all one object right now. And so there's kind of 2 things to show you here. So the first off is we can add, when you're using the hypershade in the future, you can select an object, and you can, to add a material, you right click and assign material to selection, right? And that's how you add new materials to different objects. But you can also, let me undo that, you can also right click and go to face mode, and I can select faces and assign a material to faces rather than just objects. So you can see that right here. So I have a couple options at my disposal, when texturing something. I could hypothetically, up here, select all these faces on that are not the windshield itself and give it like a metal texture, right? And then select the glass and give that a glass texture. So, that's one option that you have available. Something else that's an option, and so this is just kind of my process, just to kind of keep things kind of tidy, I guess, in a sense, is I'll try to extract this glass out just like we did the doors. And one thing that I've noticed in Arnold when rendering is glass looks a lot better when it's three-dimensional rather than flat. So why don't we just test that out real quick to show you. So I'm going to open the Hypershade, and you can follow along with us too if you're making glass, right? Because we can use this glass in just a moment. So Hypershade, which is this button, going down to Maya, Arnold, Shader, or I'm sorry, not Maya, go down to Arnold and then Shader. We're going to use the AI standard surface, so this one right here. And on this, we can choose presets, and so click on this presets button, hold it down, and then there's a glass option right there. So glass and replace. And this preset's almost perfect, except for if I scroll down a little bit to transmission, it's at 100% transparency right there. And so I like to just take the transparency and just nudge it down just a little bit. And that's the only thing that I changed. And then lastly, just be sure to name it. You see how in your library, it'll show up as just a black square. It's just really advantageous to be naming materials as you create them. So let's run a test here. So I'm going to create a plane and move that up. And we're going to add a glass material to it. And then next, I'm going to add a rectangle. Maybe thin it out a little bit. And we'll add a glass material to that. And then finally, I'm just going to duplicate that by pressing Command D or Control D. And I think I can quickly create a bevel. And you don't need to follow along with us. This is just to kind of show you something here. So I'm going to add some segments, fraction. So that's a good approximation at least. All right, so we have 3 objects right there. And I'm going to assign the glass material to all 3. So 1, 2, 3, holding shift, assign material to selection. Let's look at what this looks like. So, oops. Okay, so you can see this glass. You can kind of see the different ways that it's behaving, right? So these 3 things look pretty different from each other. And I feel like, do you see these refractions that are starting to happen right there? The glass starts to kind of behave more naturally when it has 3 dimensions. Do you see in this panel, I don't know, to me, like there's an aesthetic you can go with there, but it looks to me like highly digital, right? And we're starting to get more and more realistic with the way the light is hitting it, the way the refractions are happening, and all that stuff by making it 3-dimensional. And so that's just to say I want to make my glass 3-dimensional. And I've already kind of started this process over here. If I were creating glass on one of these windows, what I would do, let's say that this was a car and the windows were just rolled up just a little bit. So I'd select those edges and I would extrude, and I would go into world mode by clicking this power button, pull it up a little bit, move it in. And I'm not going to get this perfect, right? I just want to show you kind of the idea. And move that in. If these are uneven, by the way, you can select all 4 of those vertices, press scale, and then drag this vertical one down, and that'll flatten them out. Press W and kind of move it in. And all right, so for most of you, you probably have a car with a hood on it or something like that, so you would already have this geometry, right? And you would just be extracting this out. So we have those faces. I would extract that. And, oh, it didn't work. Let me try that one more time. Let's see, sometimes, looks like my mesh display got a little bit messed up too. Let me just see. Might need to switch this to modeling mode. Okay, there we go. All right, so let's try that again. So 1, 2, 3 faces, press 4, make sure I didn't select anything by mistake, 5 to go back. and I will extract. All right, so that time it worked. And so we have the door and then the window. And so instead of just throwing the glass material onto this, all I recommend doing is just right clicking, go to face mode, select those three faces, and go to the modeling toolkit and extrude it. And so we're just gonna bring them out to make them three-dimensional. And I recommend just bring them into the car, right? I don't wanna bring it out, and I'll bring it in. And from there, we should be in pretty good shape. And you can see that my faces turned black rather than gray. So if that happens to you, just select your object and make sure you're in modeling standard view and go to mesh display and then reverse. And that'll flip it inside out. And so now, finally, all I need to do is in the hypershade, I already have my glass material. And I'm just going to assign the glass material to that. And now we should have a glass shader, right? And so I would do that same thing right here. So I would add a chrome material to this outside, do that exact same process to this glass and to create that. And from there, you can see if we just zoom in a little bit on this glass, just that little bit of three-dimensionality makes a big difference in adding that realism rather than if it's a flat object.